Lead Up Principle number 6. Be prepared every time you take your leader's time. In the spring of 2005, Time magazine had an article about Bill Gates and the Xbox 360 gaming system that Microsoft has been working on. I'm not a video game player, so that doesn't hold much personal interest for me. However, the opening sentences of the article about Gates caught my attention because they highlighted the importance of a leader's time. The article said, Bill Gates' time is valuable. There are Microsoft employees who wait their whole career to be alone with Gates for 45 minutes. As the richest man in the world and arguably the greatest philanthropist in history, at any given moment Gates could and probably should be off feeding the hungry or curing some horrible disease. For all leaders, time is precious. Time is the one commodity that cannot be increased no matter what a leader does. For that reason, you must always be prepared when you take any of your leader's time. Though you may have latitude in how you spend your employees' or peers' time, when dealing with those above you, the amount of time you can spend is limited. If you desire to lead up, you need to act accordingly. Number 1, invest 10x. You show your value when you show that you value your leader's time. The best way to do that is to spend 10 minutes preparing for every minute that you expect to meet. Most top leaders are good decision makers. If they're not, they rarely get the opportunity to lead from the top of the organization. But many times when they are unable to make decisions, it is because they don't have enough information. I know that's true for me. When my assistant cannot get a quick answer from me on an issue, it's usually because she hasn't done enough homework on the front end. That's not to say it happens very often. Linda is awesome, and 99% of the time she doesn't even ask me a question until she's put in all the groundwork. She easily invests 10x, putting in 10 minutes of preparation for every minute of my time. The less relational connection you have with your leaders, the more time you ought to put in on the front end preparing. The less your leaders know about you, the smaller the window of time you may have to prove yourself. But if you prepare well, chances are you will get other opportunities. Number 2, don't make your boss think for you. Have you ever had an employee who seemed to ask questions constantly without ever taking the time to think for himself? It can be very frustrating, can't it? Leaders in the middle should ask questions of their bosses only when they cannot answer those questions. Here's how leaders at the top think when they receive questions from leaders in the middle. If they ask questions because they can't think, then we're in trouble. If they ask questions because they're lazy, then they are in trouble. If they ask questions so that everyone can move faster, then we're headed for success. While bad questions have a negative impact, good questions actually do several positive things. They clarify objectives, they speed up the process of completion, and they stimulate good thinking. All of these things will benefit the organization and help you stand out in a positive way with your leader. Number 3, bring something to the table. For years, I have used the expression, bring something to the table, to describe a person's ability to contribute to a conversation or to add value to others at a meeting. Not everyone does that. In life, some people always want to be the guest. Wherever they go, they want to be served, to have their needs met, to be the recipient. Because they possess that attitude, they never bring anything to the table for anyone else. After a while, that can really wear out the person who's always playing host. People who become 360-degree leaders don't work that way. Their mindset is to be constantly looking for ways to bring something to the table for their leaders, their peers, and their employees, whether it's resources, ideas, or opportunities. As the leader of an organization, I'm always looking for people who bring something to the table in the area of ideas. If they can be creative and generate ideas, that's great. But I also highly value people who are constructive, who take an idea that someone puts on the table and make it better. Often the difference between a good idea and a great idea is the value added to it during the collaborative thinking process. Number 4, when asked to speak, don't wing it. I admire people who can think on their feet and handle tough situations, but I have little respect for people who don't prepare. I've found that the first time a person wings it, people usually cannot tell, but by the third or fourth meeting, when a person talks without thinking, everybody knows it. Why? Because everything they say starts to sound the same. If people have little professional depth, they use everything they know as they wing it. The next time they try it, you hear the same kinds of things you heard the last time. After a while, they lose all credibility. Number 5, learn to speak your boss's language. When Charlie Wetzel, my writer, and I first started working together back in 1994, I spent a good deal of time working with him to help him understand how I think and learn how I speak. The first thing I did was to get him recordings of the first 100 lessons on leadership I taught so that he got a better feel for my communication. Next, I took him on the road with me while I was speaking. After a presentation, I would ask him to identify what parts of the session connected with the audience and where he thought the high points were. We would discuss it so that I could sense whether he was getting it. I would also occasionally pass along a bunch of quotes and illustrations to him and ask him to mark what he thought were the good ones. Then we would compare notes. All of the things I did with Charlie were to help him learn to speak my language. That was critical if he was to write for me, but it is also important for any employee and especially important for 360-degree leaders in the middle of an organization. Learning their boss's language will help them not only to communicate with their boss, but also to communicate with others on behalf of their boss. The goal isn't to become a yes man, but to be able to connect. Number 6, get to the bottom line. Playwright Victor Hugo said, "Short as life is, we make it still shorter by the careless waste of time." I haven't met a good leader yet who didn't want to get quickly to the bottom line. Why? Because leaders want results. When you first begin working with a leader, you may need to give insight into the process by which you came to a decision. Early on in the relationship, you will have to earn your credibility. But as time goes by and the relationship builds, just get to the point. Just because you possess all the data needed to explain what you're doing doesn't mean you need to share it. If your leader wants more detail or wants to know about the process you used, he can ask you for it. And number 7, give a return on your leader's investment. When you are continually prepared every time you take your leader's time, there is a good chance that he will begin to see the time he spends with you as an investment. And nothing is as rewarding to leaders who invest in others as seeing a positive return on what they give. I mentor about a half dozen people. One person I love spending time with is Courtney McBath, pastor of a church in Norfolk, Virginia. Every time I meet with him, in one way or another, he says,